Okay. Good luck, guys. I'll see you later. We'll all see you later.
Science and technology and innovation, these are indispensable in the modern economy, in the modern world.
We held a meeting at the MSI, and we resolved among about 6 to 8 of us, local members, first to form PAASE Philippines so that we could continue to host meetings here, but also to go on a massive campaign to try to get support from the national government through the legislative and executive branches to invest more in science and technology. So it started with a white paper, a position paper that we co-authored among 6 of us, namely Ernie Pernia, Cesar Saloma, Rador Asansa, Toby Dairita Fataneo, and Alvin Culaba de la Salle, and myself.
So PAASE historically, in the past 10, 20 years for sure, have been collaborating with our counterparts here in the Philippines at various universities. And a lot of these interactions probably started as peer-to-peer. But thankfully, we have the Department of Science and Technology here in the Philippines, and they've come up with some really helpful and very impactful programs that actually enable PAASE members that are based in the United States and other parts of the world to actually come here and do extensive research and academic partnerships and collaborations.
Well, I think that one of the good things that PAASE is doing is really trying to stay in touch with the researchers and the scientists here in the Philippines. So I think that is one of the good programs that they keep on supporting some of the initiatives of our researchers and scientists here in the country, trying to align also their assistance towards the plans of the Philippine government.
It's very important that the PAASE members and scientists based in the Philippines are continuously in contact, so we will know the needs of the Filipinos and opportunities that Filipinos can have to do science with their PAASE counterparts. So these interactions, such as the conference that we're holding and the annual conferences that we have.
The Philippines and the scientists there have very unique perspective that adds to discoveries and inventions advancing in general the field.
These members, because they are part of an academy, it implies that they are productive. So they have publications, they have innovations, they have inventions, patents, and they have, they have an impact on society. Okay, so these are the people who can convince government, invest more in science and technology, and that was really the gist of our paper, our position paper in 2000. And it is Ernie Pernia who said that R&D by nature is expensive and it is a public good. So it is important for the government to take the lead in investing in R&D.
To increase the economic growth potential of the country, we cannot continue to just rely on traditional inputs into production as capital and labor. We also need to develop our expertise in science and technology and innovation so that we can come up with new systems new ways of doing things?
I think that science, researchers, industry, and even the government is really like an ecosystem of knowledge. So I think it doesn't really matter if you're coming from a private institution or a public institution, such as a state university. I think we all have a role to play to improve the research capabilities and scientific knowledge here in the country. I think it is about time for us to realize that one of our roles as academics, as researchers, as scientists, is to actually contribute to that global body of knowledge.
And the role of this cooperation among these government agencies really is to be able to attract science and technology, global-based companies to set up shop here. And that is really key in terms of developing the science and technology innovation ecosystem in the country.
Particularly because there's that deep desire. And what PAASE does and can do more of is to promote this relationship between its members.
We really need to ratchet up the appreciation, the recognition of the importance of science and technology and innovation.
And we are all trying to attain what we call the common good, the greater, higher, long-term good of the Filipino people.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening here in the US. PAASE members and colleagues, I would like to welcome you to the highlight of the meeting, the awarding of the Severino and PAASE Co-Lectureship Award. Because this is our 40th anniversary, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Professor Ko. Professor Ko was one of the original co-founder of PAASE. He completed his PhD thesis at Purdue University with the title On the Foundations of Nonlinear Thermoviscoelasticity. He moved to the University of Maryland, where he founded the College of Engineering and served as Associate Dean in 1964. Professor and Ms. Ko and early founders of PAASE left a lasting legacy in the form of a generous endowment that provides a cash award to the winner. In 2000, at the Manila Shangri-La Hotel, this award was first established to recognize a PAASE member with outstanding scientific and technological accomplishments. It was originally called the Founders Lectureship Awards in Science and Engineering, and the name was changed to the Severino and PAASE Co-Lectureship Awards in Science and Engineering upon Professor Ko's death in 2004. And this year's awardee is Dr. Joost Santos. PAASE President Concepcion will read the certificate, and Dr. Culaba will present the check for $1,000 US.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gisela Concepcion. I am deeply honored to present this certificate of award to Dr. Joost R. Santos, the 2020 Severino and PAASE Co-Lectureship Awardee in Engineering. Given this day, 22 July 2020, during the 40th PAASE anniversary and 2020 APAMS, Manila, Philippines. Signed, Gisela P. Concepcion, PAASE President 2020, Alvin Culaba, Chair, PAASE Committee on Severino and PAASE Co-Lectureship Awards 2020, attested by Lourdes Harold, PAASE Secretary 2020. Congratulations, Dr. Joost Santos.
Thank you so much, Giselle.
And the check of US $1,000. Joost, please, the honors of receiving.
Thank you. Thank you for sending me the checks and certificates.
the Severino and PAASE Co-Lectureship Award in Engineering, Dr. Joost Santos. We know him as Joost, currently an associate professor at the Department of Engineering Management and Systems Engineering, George Washington University. His research interests lie at the intersection of systems engineering, disaster risk analysis, and economics. Professor Santos is one of the principal investigators in the 2018 Mitigation Saves, a highly cited report internationally. He is also one of the PIs in a multi-university National Science Foundation grant titled Organizing Decentralized Resilience in Critical Interdependent Infrastructure Systems and Processes. One of the key developers of the Interoperability Input-Output Model, or IIM, which utilizes and transforms economic input-output accounts for disaster risk analysis applications. This model has been applied to hurricane impact analysis, multi-state electric power blackout, evaluation of renewable energy options, and most recently, in the analysis of mitigation measures in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. A two-time DOST Balik scientist in 2012 and 2016, and as a visiting professor in 2015 in the Philippines, he had mentored Filipino graduate students, notably Dr. Joanna Resurrection and Dr. Krista Yu of UP Diliman and DLSU, respectively. Results of his research activities are documented in more than 100 peer-reviewed articles, including a highly cited article on the use of IIM, which appeared in an issue of Risk Analysis Journal in 2004, and subsequently earned him 2 Best Paper Awards from the Society for Risk Analysis. In 2009, he received the prestigious Leontief Memorial Prize from the International Input-Output Association. Joost grew up and spent his childhood and adolescent years in a low-income rural area in the Philippines. His mother was an elementary school teacher and single-handedly took care of him and his 2 siblings with her measly salary. His educational journey was centered on his vision to become a teacher, just like his mother. A scholar all throughout, his teaching career began at UP as an instructor in engineering sciences in 1994. He was an outstanding instructor awardee from the UP College of Engineering in 1996. In 1999, he pursued his PhD degree in systems engineering at the University of Virginia, where he received the Louis T. Rader Outstanding Graduate Student Award. He dedicates this co-lectureship award to his mother and first teacher, Emiliana Santos, who has inspired him to enter and pursue the indescribably beautiful world of teaching.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Dr. Alvin Culaba. I promise that I will turn on my video once the presentation is over. So just to make sure, before I begin, can everyone see the slide that I have just shared on the screen?
Yes, Joost.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So again, thanks, Dr. Culaba. Good morning and good evening to my kababayans in the Philippines, in the USA, and in other parts of the globe. I am most definitely honored to have been nominated and selected for this year's 2020 Severino and PAASE Award Lectureship in Engineering. So the title of my presentation is Systems Engineering Perspectives on Disaster Risk Management. I would certainly be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the following. First and foremost, the Philippine American Academy of Science and Engineering, especially the nominator, and the committee who eventually conferred me the co-award for engineering. Secondly, the National Science Foundation for funding my current and past grants, and for supporting my interest with disasters, disaster risk management, that is. And finally, for the George Washington University, which I have considered my second home since 2009. On a personal level, I dedicate this presentation to my friends way back from my student days at the University of Philippines, Diliman. After all these years, our friendship has not dissipated. We still meet regularly via Zoom, and I actually can see some of them here attending this Zoom presentation. And secondly, to my friends whom I have met via the karaoke app Smule, thank you for helping me maintain a mostly happy life while in isolation through your gift of music. Let's keep on singing, jamming, and dancing till the wee hours of the morning, and be always deserving of the hashtag Locarettes. To my research collaborators from De La Salle University, whom I truly consider friends, thank you for letting me immerse in productive research while enjoying your world-class friendship. Also, among these pictures are two of my PhD students whom I mentored at the George Washington University, who are now serving the nation, Philippines, through educating the future generation, one at UP Diliman and the other at De La Salle University, Manila. And finally, this is not a Photoshop picture. It really did happen. At the beginning of the year 2020, my family and I, we were together in 100 Islands in Alaminos, Pangasinan, and it was indeed a 100% quality family bonding moment. I'm so glad we did it before the pandemic became more complicated. So this slide shows the outline of my talk. Many of you here know and have probably read some of my papers on input-output models. Input-output modeling has its roots from the field of economics, and its application in engineering has been one of the things that I started together with my PhD advisor way back in the early 2000s. To date, a Google search of inoperability input-output model collectively would reveal upwards of 20,000 hits. The inoperability input-output model, or IIM in short, has been featured in a myriad of disaster risk management applications. Hence, it has been tremendously challenging for me to choose the two applications that I'd like to showcase in this presentation. In the end, I decided to choose the following two studies. Firstly, the mitigation save study, and secondly, the recently published papers on the COVID-19 pandemic. This presentation will then culminate with a Q&A portion. The next slide will present a quick overview of this presentation. With the rising likelihood and consequences from natural and human-caused disasters, it is constructed to decompose the two primary types of loss associated with such events. The first is the so-called stock loss, which would include damage to human and man-made natural physical systems. The second is the so-called flow loss, which the literature also refers to business interruptions, or BI in short. I know that Filipinos use BI for something else, but for this presentation, it stands for business interruptions. Business interruption, according to leading academic and insurance journals, has ranked among the costliest category of financial loss, and also highest area of risk concern amongst economic sectors. In this series of slides, I will present a relatively quick lecture on input-output models and its inoperability input-output model extensions. The Leontief IO model, or input-output model, has been developed by Wassily Leontief in the 1930s, for which he received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1973. Anyone who would like to know more and explore about the model should have a copy of the so-called Bible for Input-Output Analysis, which is the book by Miller and Blair, as shown at the bottom of this slide. This simplified generic two-sector economy has been lifted directly from Miller and Blair's book. The highlighted cells here show the inter-industry transactions, or the endogenous consumptions from within the sectors themselves. Shown also is the column of final demands, which are the exogenous or external consumptions attributable to the households, government, and private firms. it also includes imports and exports. Note that the sum of the final demands give rise to the so-called gross domestic product or GDP, which I assume everyone is familiar with. This table also shows the value added row. Examples of value added include compensation to employees, machines, hardware, software, and others. Coincidentally, the sum of the value added also gives the gross domestic product, which is actually a really beautiful mathematical thing that's going on here in the input-output table. When the shaded cells are normalized, it produces the so-called Leontief matrix A, which measures the strength of interdependencies across the sectors. In this slide, furthermore, when we subtract the matrix A from the previous slide, we subtract it from a conformable identity matrix I and eventually take its inverse. This would generate the total requirements matrix denoted by L. When I was still a young instructor at the University of the Philippines, I used to teach linear algebra, and never in my wildest dream to see a real-world application of matrix inversion happening right before my and your eyes. So many nations across the globe, including the Philippines, publish the L matrix. Important policy insights can be gleaned from its column sums. For example, if you look at the value of 1.51, which is the column sum for column 1, how do we interpret it? It means that for every $1 or 1 peso increase in the demand for sector 1, the resulting increase in the production will be $1.51. The first column of L matrix shows how such total production increase is distributed across the two sectors. $1.25 for sector 1 and 0.26 cents for sector 2. The same can be said for the second column sum, which is 1.45, which is the total output multiplier for sector 2. Shown here is an actual L matrix for the United States, comprising of 15 sectors. Note that higher resolution L matrices can comprise of more than 400 sectors. To explain the column sums, this 15-sector aggregation shall suffice. Note that the sector here, look at the highlighted cells here in red. The sector with the highest column sum is the manufacturing sector, which is S5. Its total multiplier is 2.48, which is quite high, knowing that we are talking about magnitudes of billions of dollars. It is followed by agriculture, denoted by S1, with a multiplier of 2.25. This is the reason why when stimulating the GDP for any economy, policymakers typically look for such key sectors, which in layman's terms, give the biggest bang for the buck. More advanced key sector analysis uses the concept of eigenvalues and eigenvectors, which we will not cover in this lecture due to time constraints. This slide shows the IIM, which is a transformation of the IO model. Several key points need to be emphasized here. First, instead of the monetary units, we normalize the output in dollars using the inoperability metric. It is a variable between 0 and 1. Which measures the proportion in which the sector is unable to satisfy its as-planned output. For example, a value of 0 for inoperability is the ideal level, meaning to say the sector is flawlessly operating. And a value of 1, another extreme value, it can be interpreted in such a way that the sector is completely out of commission or completely inoperable. The model also includes the resilience matrix, which represents the rate with which a sector is expected to bounce back to the pre-disaster level of production. The model also includes the impact on demand, denoted by C. And finally, it has to be noted that this is a dynamic model that gives the level of inoperability in each time step of the recovery horizon. This slide demonstrates a two-sector stylized example that shows how a directly impacted sector, which in this case is sector 2, the light blue curve. When sector 2, when we take a look at it, it starts with a high level of inoperability until it recovers to a near zero inoperability. This slide also shows another sector, which I'd like to request your attention to look at the dark blue curve here, which is sector 1. This sector, sector 1, which it wasn't directly perturbed, but it became increasingly inoperable until it reaches its peak and then starts recovering. This graphic shows how the input-output model, depending on the intensity of the impact on the sectors, which is the yellow, orange, and green shaded cells there, depending on the intensity of the impact on the sectors, would create cascading impact on other sectors of the economy. In the United States, input-output data can be accessed through the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is a division under the Census Bureau, and also a private company called Implan. In the Philippines, I believe it's the acronym is NCSB, or NSCB, National Statistical Coordination Board. So in this slide, I took the liberty of sharing with you a screenshot of what you would expect when you go to the Bureau of Economic Analysis input-output accounts. Input-output data are publicly available through this website for free. This screenshot shows various resolutions of the model according to 15, 71, or 405 industry sector classifications. Having introduced the input-output theory and data sources, we now delve into the first of the two applications that I prepared for tonight's presentation. The first one is the Mitigation Save Study. The Mitigation Save Study was funded by the National Institute for Building Sciences, and we worked actively with agencies like FEMA, Housing and Urban Development, and others. The second version of Mitigation Saves, which we used the mnemonic MSV2, for which I was one of the investigators, produced an average benefit to cost ratio of 6:1. The details for the different kinds of disaster are also shown in the table here on the right panel of this slide. This was a rigorous study in which multiple academic and research institutions were involved. One of my favorite quotes from Benjamin Franklin, he once said that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And analogously, indeed, in this study, we have proven that $1 worth of mitigation investment translates to an average savings of about $6 relative to the unmitigated case. You might think that $6 is small, but when we talk about billions of dollars of investments, this translates to $6 billion, which I believe is the check that PAASE is gonna issue to me. The Mitigation Save Study has been cited by a myriad of news articles, academic journals, and government agencies. The study was cited in the US Congress Flood Risk Mitigation Act of 2018, as shown in this slide. So we are shown as footnote number 4 here. So what did I do for this Mitigation Save Study? The methodology that I developed comprises of the two following phases. First, we looked at various building types and we mapped them according to the most relevant input-output sectors with which they belong. This process will be explained on subsequent slides. And secondly, we simulated various resilience strategies to decrease the impact of a disaster. We simulated various types of building damage, superimposed the resilience strategies, and computed the resulting direct and indirect business interruptions. In the next few slides, I will take you to a quick journey of how we developed the methodology and present you the key or the highlights of the results. This table shows the mapping between the input-output sectors and the building types. Once the damage was assessed in each building type, we ran the input-output model to estimate the business interruption losses, taking into consideration the implementation of resilience strategies. As you can see here, examples of building categories could range from residential, commercial, industrial, and as well as education and government. And here, you could see the mapping of the input-output sector categories and the different building types. There are 33 building types that we used according to the software called HAZUS that I showed you from the previous slide. So you can see a one-to-one, almost a seemingly one-to-one direct correspondence between the equivalent input-output sector and also the HAZUS building occupancy class. Next, 4 types of resilience strategies were considered, namely production recapture. Examples of production recapture include overtime and extra shifts to catch up for lost production. Secondly, inventory. This includes stockpiles of production inputs to anticipate supply shortfalls. And then we also have relocation, which is moving production to other regions that are not impacted by a disaster. And finally, excess capacity, which refers to underutilized factories or equipment that can be invoked in times of disasters. For those attendees who are located in the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia area, there's a storm brewing right now. So I'm gonna cross my fingers that I won't get disconnected. This actually makes me feel nostalgic. I'm going out of my script. When I presented my final project for the Balik Scientist program, and I know that Raymond Tan is in the audience, there was like severe weather disturbance. His car got flooded, and every time I would make this presentation, it seems that disasters like to be keeping me company during these kinds of presentations. So we're halfway there, so I'm sure I'll be able to go under the 40-minute allocation that was given to me by Dr. Culaba. This set of graphics published by a collaborator and former student, Cash Barker, shows the efficacy of inventories in delaying the impact of disasters on various sectors. Without inventory, shown in red, the inoperability is expected to be significantly higher, especially at the beginning phases of a disaster. The blue curves show how inoperability and ultimately business interruptions can be significantly reduced by having stockpiles of inventories in anticipation of the arrival of a disaster. Shown in this plot is the concept of production recapture in the context of the so-called resilience triangle. The black curve shows the baseline inoperability trajectory, while the red curve shows the corresponding reduced level of inoperability due to production recapture. Again, production recapture includes overtime and extra shifts to recoup for lost production. This table shows the recapture rate for various sectors of the economy. A quick example, I'd like to point your attention to the first value you can see in this table, 0.75. The first value of 0.75 means that the agriculture sector is expected to recover 75% of its lost production for the first 3 months or first 90 days. The same interpretation can be said about the other values of the table shown in this slide. So some sectors are leveraging production recapture much better than others. As you can see, see 0.98. And some sectors, like at the bottom here, government, sector is not typically good with production recapture. The production recapture is only 47%. The discussion of the remaining resilience strategies, I've mentioned relocation and excess capacity, has been truncated in tonight's presentation in the interest of time. Now, let us proceed with the key results. This chart shows the business interruption loss for every $1 loss in each of the 33 building types. This chart assumes that resilience strategies are in place. Entertainment and residential sectors are among the sectors that have high business interruption multipliers, and this result is quite intuitive. For example, it is difficult to recoup lost shows, movies, or concerts for the entertainment sector. The concept of production recapture or inventory do not particularly apply to the entertainment sector. The same can be said for residential sectors, which include hotels and other temporary dwellings. This slide juxtaposes the result with the omission of the resilience strategies. Without resilience, shown in red bars, the picture drastically changes. The high business interruption multipliers would now include sectors such as food, drugs, agriculture, banks, professional services, and education. I, for one, can serve as a testament as a professor that I've already taught seemingly gazillions of online courses for the past few weeks. And that shows the resilience of universities, just like the university that I am currently with, the George Washington University. So in summary, for the mitigation save study, we developed a methodology for linking building types with economic sectors, simulated direct damage scenarios, applied resilience tactics, and assessed business interruption multipliers for various building types. Such multipliers were integrated with other benefits of mitigation from different dimensions, including savings associated with adherence with building codes. So one of my best friends, she's now the same age as myself, retired, happily retired in Florida. And Florida is one of the states that adhere to strictly to the so-called I codes or international building codes. And she mentioned to me that if you buy a property that doesn't comply with the building codes, you will have to pay hefty insurance premiums. So also, for business interruption, one of our collaborators also calculated the cost of loss of lives and also the incidence of the post-traumatic stress disorder. So we now move on to another case study, the second and final case study that I'll be presenting to you today or tonight for people in the United States. In the next set of slides, we will make a gear shift and proceed with the application of the inoperability input-output model to the COVID-19 pandemic. In recent weeks, I have published COVID-19 related papers in 2 journals. The left of the slide shows the front page of the paper published in Environment, Systems, and Decisions. The right panel of the slide shows the one that is published in Sustainable Production and Consumption, or SPC. A special shout out to Professor Raymond R for connecting me with the editor-in-chief of SPC and providing ideas on how to frame the paper. To set the context for the case study, let us look at the flatten the curve concept as depicted in this slide. Flattening the curve is of extreme importance since it relieves the pressure of the constrained capacity of healthcare systems, essentially buying time before effective vaccines become available. Deadly pandemics have happened previously. One of the deadliest one, known as the 1918 Spanish flu, killed more than 50 million, again, I'd say it, 50 million people worldwide. And here in the United States, 500,000 people. And some studies even indicated in the United States, it could have been as high as 700,000 people due to lack of reporting or underreporting. So fast forward into today, we are still struggling to manage the exponentially rising transmission of the COVID-19 pandemic caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Unlike other viral diseases that tend to take a break during warm weather months, this coronavirus currently is still on the upsurge. I'm scared. I have to admit it, I'm scared, but I remain hopeful. For example, the recent news about the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, known as the AZD1222, has appeared to produce promising antibody response and could move to mass-scale production by the end of this year. In the absence of vaccines, however, 3 categories of non-pharmaceutical interventions, or NPIs, can be implemented, namely containment, suppression, and mitigation. Containment is the approach of managing individual infections, essentially isolating active cases away from the general population. It is deemed effective only prior to community transmission, or if the cases have been suppressed down to a manageable number to effectively implement quarantine and contact tracing, just like in the case of New Zealand and Taiwan and Singapore. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but they are led by female leaders. Shout out to those fantastic women. Suppression refers to measures in which primary aim is to reduce the reproduction number, R naught. So for those of you who are familiar with the so-called SIR model, susceptible, infected, recovered model, so there's a parameter there called R naught, which measures the transmission rate. We'd like this multiplier effect to be less than 1. So suppression measures include quarantine, travel restrictions, and also business and school closures, among others. On the other hand, mitigation is the one that is actually most closely associated with the flatten the curve concept. The primary aim is to implement the so-called trinity of mitigation measures. In the papers that I have published, I have coined the phrase trinity of mitigation measures that include physical distancing, face covering, and hand hygiene. Some people today still use social distancing, but I believe in my heart that it should be physical distancing because we could still be socially connected via social media, just like what we're doing today. So this slide shows the Johns Hopkins University COVID-19 dashboard. As of yesterday, so Dr. Culaba requested me to submit my slide 1 day ahead of time. So I'm not sure to what extent the data has already changed from yesterday to today. So this slide was from yesterday. As of yesterday, there were a total of 14.5 million recorded cases and over 600,000 deaths globally. United States of America continues to lead the cases with a very big margin, followed by Brazil. I hope you could see the irony here. United States has only about 4% of the world population, but accounts for a staggering 25%, I repeat, 25% of the recorded cases. Makes me sad. The approach in this case study is to use epidemic curves or epicurves published by the CDC. In particular, we utilize the weekly attack rates, which tell the number of active cases expressed as a proportion of the population. Given the attack rates, we can customize the so-called sector-specific attack rates that consider the resiliency of each sector, notably its workforce. Workforce is a critical production factor. It is the heartbeat of any sector and any society. I have published a paper with my collaborators from De La Salle University, in which we came up with the acronym WAIT, which gives the dimensions for resilience. Weight includes workforce, the first of the acronym, economy, infrastructure, geography, hierarchy, and temporal or time dimensions. Workforce debilitating events such as the COVID-19 pandemic can have adverse effects on the output, production output of any sectors. Some sectors are impacted more, some less. For example, sectors that have moved to online platforms were able to avoid significant losses. Some sectors have found creative ways to continue their operations, such as in the case of grocery and food delivery. Essential sectors such as hospitals, meat and food processing plants, and stores continue to operate. Hopefully, their workforce are provided with effective PPEs or personal protective equipment. In this slide, we show the assumed parameters for the 4 scenarios considered in the study. Here, we could see a baseline scenario with a peak attack rate of 50% over a course of the 60-day horizon. The parameters for mitigation and suppression scenarios are also shown. Longer in duration, but significantly lower attack rates. Finally, the last column of this table, scenario 4, is a re-simulation of the suppression scenario, taking into account sector-specific workforce resilience. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see some examples like continuity strategies, teleworking, transitioning service to online platform, curbside pickup or delivery for stores and restaurants. So this series of charts show the resulting economic losses across the 4 scenarios. Each chart shows the most affected sectors. Even a cursory glance at the results appears to indicate the efficacy of mitigation and suppression measures in flattening the curve. So I will show you a more aggregated view, juxtaposing all of the 4 scenarios in a few slides from now. Several observations could be made. The loss incurred in each sector is a function of both the magnitude of its GDP as well as its reliance on labor. The simulation also reveals the heavily impacted sectors that are among the highest contributors to the GDP, including government, trade, and construction. The results also appear to indicate profound impacts on labor-dependent sectors such as service, hospitals, food, and labor-dependent management companies. This chart aggregates the losses for all sectors in each of the 4 scenarios. It shows the extent to which mitigation and suppression measures could effectively flatten the curve. So for those who are watching the news right before we started this virtual presentation, I would surmise that some of you saw the study for the United States that strongly said that if 90% of the population in the United States would practice the trinity of mitigation. What's the trinity again? Physical distancing, hand hygiene, and the controversial mask, then the wave will be flattened and will actually be within the control, just like what's happening in Taiwan, New Zealand, as well as Singapore, and also to some extent, Japan. So given the simulation of the 4 scenarios, the cumulative economic losses were computed, showing a stark contrast and potential savings realizable with the implementation of suppression and mitigation measures. The losses were also expressed as a percentage of the GDP. The data here shown on this slide is for the United States. A recent article by Korea and others looked at the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic and concluded that cities that implemented stricter measures generally realized higher employment rates several years after the pandemic. Nonetheless, in the implementation of mitigation and suppression measures, policymakers and government officials need to be cognizant of the negative side effects of such measures. These side effects include decreased public morale, mental health, and substance abuse. Studies have also revealed the unfortunate disparity of effects of the pandemic across different income groups and different socioeconomic groups. In summary, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the significant gaps in current disaster risk management frameworks. Challenges include political resistance to science. I'd like to repeat it. Political resistance to science and mismanagement of some regions and nations, notably the logistical issues surrounding with healthcare resource optimization and case management. To conclude, let me show you this graphic. As I read off directly from the slide, I would like to encourage you to make your own personal reflections, which could also be a good segue towards the Q&A portion. So this slide says, there were 3 different waves of illness during the 1918 pandemic, starting in March 1918 and subsiding by summer of 1919. The pandemic peaked in the US during the second wave, in the fall of 1918. This highly fatal second wave was responsible for most of the US deaths attributed to this pandemic. Thank you so much for your attendance and attention. I hope that in this presentation, I am able to show you my systems engineering and economic perspectives on disaster risk management. Quoting the famous George Box from Statistics, all models are wrong, but some are useful. One of my favorite quotes in the world. Again, that's all models are wrong, but some are useful. Huge thanks to my students, some of whom are here, and research collaborators who continue to have faith on the usability of the inoperability input-output model. I now relinquish the floor to the esteemed Dr. Alvin Culaba to moderate the Q&A portion.
Thank you very much, Joost. Indeed, a well-deserved co-lectureship awardee for this year in the field of engineering. Your talk opens up many things. Certainly in the Philippines, we need sound and rigorous analytical tools to provide disaster planning and management insights, especially for our policymakers. So to our participants here in our virtual meeting in Zoom, and those who are logged into our YouTube channel, thank you for gracing this plenary session on co-lectureship award. We are going to proceed with a question and answer for this special session for Dr. Joost Santos. We have one question from Dr. Raymond Tan. Can we show that question, please? Okay, from Raymond Tan. Okay, let's take the question from Gil Mendoza. For the mitigation case study, I have a 2-part question. Number 1, it seems to me that the inoperability metric is the sole basis for analyzing impacts. No mention about economic loss, a key component of the IO model. Second, the inoperability measure is a key variable in the model. I understand it is based on some target, ideal, planned level. Why not based on actually achievable level? So it is between 0 to 1 because it is based on the target level. How is this target level determined or estimated? Just 2 questions for you from Hill.
So I'll answer the first question first. Inoperability is indeed the key metric for presenting the results. But actually, economic loss is there. It might have just been buried with a 40-minute presentation. When I presented the GDP results and also those trajectory of economic losses, those waves for the four scenarios, the y-axis are actually in monetary values. So it's actually a straightforward computation. Once we are able to compute the inoperability for a particular economic sector, we simply multiply it with the ideal GDP, or the production output rather, for that sector, which will give the economic loss equivalent of the inoperability. So for the second question, it is based on target or ideal or as planned level. You are correct. And the target level is assumed to be a forecast of the previous year's GDP. So as what we have seen in the coronavirus pandemic, not just in the United States, but across the globe, there has been clear reduction in the GDP because of business closures and the impact of mitigation measures. So the ideal level is pegged from, let's say, first quarter GDP or second quarter GDP from previous years. And I lost the copy of the, there was a PowerPoint slide there, and I don't know if I have already optimally answered the question. So the rejoinder to the first question, I think I've already answered it. So the target level is estimated from previous year's GDP levels. So in sum, economic loss values are directly computable from the inoperability metrics.
Thank you, Joost. Let me take you to the next question from Michael Promentilla. Congrats, Joost. I hope the mitigation study could be extended to Philippines setting in this regard. Would multiple disasters in succession was considered in the simulation, and which of the resilience tactics has the largest impact in the rebound effect?
So before I answer the question, I'm glad to see Dr. Promentilla in the audience. And for those who don't know it, one of the most famous articles published by the Medium, it's titled, correct me if I'm wrong, like Hammer, something like that. I'm blanking out because I'm nervous. But Dr. Promentilla was the one who single-handedly translated that seminal article by Tomas Pueyo. You would see Tomas Pueyo constantly on CNN. So Dr. Promentilla translated it in Filipino version. So to answer Dr. Promentilla's question, when I was writing the paper, never in my imagination that that the United States will have its spike right now. The assumption was a 60-day epidemic curve, which was the prediction if the mitigation measures were religiously implemented by the White House and also the population. But unfortunately, I don't want to go to the politics of this, but since the people here are believers of science, so try to imagine the epidemic curve to have been a smooth, unimodal function. But in the case of the United States, it's currently a bimodal function. So to answer Dr. Promentilla's question, in the scenario which was simplified enough, I didn't take into consideration this succession of events. And I myself was surprised with the bimodality. It's not even the second wave yet, but you could see the bimodal nature, which if I were to resimulate the scenario, I could have considered 2 peak attack rates for the study. And I hope I'm able to answer your question, Dr. Promentilla. And of course,
thank you, Joost.
Of course, this study, just quickly, this study could be implemented also in the Philippines. Dr. Krista Yu and also the DLSU economists are familiar with input-output model and also computable general equilibrium.
Thank you, Joost. We haven't received questions on the YouTube, listeners. Let me read the question from Raymond R. Thanks, Joost, for your excellent talk, and congrats on a well-deserved recognition. My question is whether permanent BI losses, such as from bankruptcies due to COVID-19 are functionally equivalent to physical damage to capital goods from disasters such as hurricanes, earthquakes, and others?
That's an excellent question. And I still have to process the question outside of this presentation. But my quick answer right now is perhaps permanent losses to firms and companies that cannot be recovered after the pandemic could be, we could draw a parallelism with capital losses or the stock losses that I mentioned in one of the slides, in order to forecast the future economic losses until such equivalent building occupancy classes associated with this economic sectors could be revived in the future. So humbly, this is an excellent question and a tough one, and I don't have a ready-made answer right now.
Thank you, Joost. Raymond, it has to wait. Maybe an opportunity for further collaborative work. Some just comments from Edsel Peña, our Vice President of PAASE. Congrats, Joost, for your co-award and for a very nice talk. Also, for providing our PAASE colleagues a glimpse of the importance of mathematics, linear algebra, and for quoting George Box. Okay. There is an additional suggestion from Gil Mendoza, as he has earlier actually asked his question. The second study, which focuses on economic loss, which was missing in the first case study. I'm wondering and recommend that in both case studies, both economic loss and inoperability metric should be used. So just, you know, a comment. Right. Anyway, he sends his congratulations to you, Joost, from Gil Mendoza. We still have a couple of minutes, about 3 to 5 minutes to accommodate more questions. If there are questions from the YouTube listeners, you know, from our audience here in Zoom, you are most welcome, you know, to speak now. Okay, so it seems that everyone's you know, satisfied. Their appetites you know, is full. Joost, for that wonderful presentation. Indeed, it is worth you know, more than just $1,000 US, to be honest. So congratulations again, and let's give Dr. Joost Santos, our 2020 co-lectureship awardee in engineering, a virtual round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joost. Of course, I know you will be holding on in this session as we proceed with our 2 additional talks from you know, our distinguished speakers, which I will be introducing in a minute. Okay. We have here our next speaker to talk on process graphs, past, present, and future. Perhaps we can see him live. Raymond, where are you? Oh, there. There you are.
Over here.
So, okay.
Good morning.
Okay. Thank you, Raymond. Good morning. Let me just introduce our speaker. Raymond R. is a professor of chemical engineering, university fellow, and current vice chancellor for research and innovation of DLSU University. and an academician of the Philippine National Academy of Science and Technology. His main research interest is the development of mathematical models for sustainable industrial systems. He has more than 380 publications with an H-index of 43 in the Scopus database, and ranks among the top researchers in the world in the subject areas of process integration, or PI, and process systems engineering, or PSE, based on Google Scholar citations. He received his BS, MS in chemical engineering, and PhD in mechanical engineering from De La Salle University. He's the editor-in-chief of Process Integration and Optimization for Sustainability of Springer Nature, subject editor of Sustainable Production and Consumption from Elsevier and IChemE, associate editor of Cleaner Engineering and Technology, also from Elsevier, and an editorial board member of Clean Technologies and Environmental Policy from Springer Nature. He is the author of the books Process Integration Approaches in Planning Carbon Management Networks from the CRC Press, and Input-Output Models for Sustainable Industrial Systems from Springer Nature, and editor of the books Recent Advances in Sustainable Process Design and Optimization from Wiley, and Process Design Strategies for Biomass Conversion Systems from World Scientific. He has received multiple scientific awards from government and scientific organizations in the Philippines, and also the PAASE 2017 Co-Lectureship Awardee in Engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, to speak on the process graphs, past, present, and future, Dr. Raymond R. Tan.
Thanks very much, Alvin. Good morning, PAASE colleagues. It's an honor to be introduced by your former PhD advisor, and Alvin and I go back a long way. However, since I have developing country internet connectivity, we thought it would be better to use a pre-recorded slideshow, and then I'll get back to the audience for the Q&A. So can we request the conference team to play?
Okay. Thank you, Raymond. There's a quick plug, and here it goes.
Good morning. My name is Raymond Tan. I'm professor of chemical engineering at De La Salle University, and my talk today is entitled Process Graphs, Past, Present, and Future. The talk is based partly on a perspective paper that I wrote with colleagues from Hungary, the Philippines, and Malaysia, and which was published last year in Current Opinion in Chemical Engineering. The main topic of my talk is the process graph, or P-graph framework, and we'll look at the past, present, and future of this computing framework. Let's begin with the past. P-graph was originally developed in the context of chemical engineering, which is dedicated to the problem of mass production of chemicals from various raw materials, using a network of chemical and physical processes that are put in sequence as shown on screen. The main design problem for chemical engineers is to put together technologies to allow conversion of raw materials into marketable products, and to do it in a profitable way. Within chemical engineering, there's a branch known as process systems engineering, which is dedicated to the development and use of various mathematical and computer tools for engineering problems. And P-graph is one of these tools. This is a graph theoretic framework to address what is known as the process network synthesis, or PNS problem, and was developed by Friedler and Fan for the purpose of developing a network of operations that can be translated eventually into an actual industrial plant out of technology building blocks. At the heart of the P-graph methodology is a bipartite graph consisting of n-type nodes to represent streams of material or energy, and O-type nodes to represent processes or operations which convert inputs into outputs. The P-graph framework begins with 5 axioms that act as foundation for the development of key algorithms that comprise this methodology. The main algorithms are as follows. Maximal structure generation, or MSG, is the algorithm which assembles process building blocks rigorously into what you may think of as a master network, formerly known as a maximal structure. And this maximal structure has an important feature in that it contains within it all possible designs that can eventually be developed for a given problem. The second algorithm is solution structure generation, or SSG. This is an enumeration algorithm which can identify all combinatorially or structurally feasible subsets of the maximal structure. And each of these solution structures represents a design alternative which can be evaluated and explored by engineers for consideration to be built into an actual plant. The third algorithm is accelerated branch and bound, or ABB, which is an algorithm which can economically evaluate the options available using SSG logic to have very fast optimization by elimination of infeasible and redundant solutions. So let's have a look at a classical problem from P-graph literature. In this case, our problem is to design a plant to produce A using raw materials E, G, J, K, and L, and using 7 processes which are shown in conventional block diagram form at the top of the screen, and shown in P-graph form in the inset at the bottom of the screen. The first problem we have is to assemble these building blocks into a master network, or the so-called maximal structure, which would produce product A using any of the raw materials which are available on the market. Application of MSG gives us the following structure on the left-hand side of the screen, and this is an algorithmically related, or rather algorithmically generated structure, and not generated based on human knowledge, which may have gaps and thus may result in human error. So that's an important feature. The next step now is, out of this maximal structure, we need to explore all possible combinatorially feasible structures which we can then further evaluate in the design problem. And you would initially think that with 7 component processes, you would have 2 raised to 7, or 128 alternatives to explore. But if we use SSG, we can initially identify these 7 structures. We can identify another 7 structures, and eventually, upon complete enumeration, we've identified 19 combinatorially feasible structures, each of which is a subset of the maximal structure, and each of which is a candidate plant design. So you would observe that we've gone from 128 alternatives down to 19, which is about an order of magnitude reduction in the search space. For much larger problems, as we've seen in the P-graph literature, the scaling down of the search space could be multiple orders of magnitude, a millionfold or more reduction. The capability to enumerate all combinatorially feasible structures that has been shown can have very useful features, because the machine-generated set of options can often be counterintuitive or surprising. In other words, these are designs that a typical engineer, drawing from his or her background knowledge, may not be able to imagine, and thus relying purely on human expertise may miss some important solutions which have interesting properties, such as higher energy efficiency or lower carbon footprint. So this is one of the important characteristics of using the P-graph methodology. PGRAPH software has evolved over multiple generations. The most accessible one is hosted by the University of Pannonia in Hungary and is accessible via pgraph.org and is open access. Now let me talk about my work using PGRAPH for conventional engineering problems, specifically thermal and energy engineering problems. I've done extensive work on what are known as polygeneration systems. This is a term which dates back to a 40-year-old NASA document, and it means the production of electricity along with other side products such as steam, chilled water, hydrogen, chemicals, and so on and so forth. And the logic behind polygeneration is that it is able to produce the products at a higher level of efficiency and lower emissions than having separate, unintegrated processes that produce them in the same quantities. In 2014, I developed with some colleagues a PGRAPH model for optimizing abnormal operations in a polygeneration plant. The abnormal operations can occur, for example, when we have to shut down parts of the plant for repair or maintenance, while keeping the rest of the plant running and trying to find the operating state that minimizes economic losses while repairs are being done. More recently, I've done work on PGRAPH models which allow for design of flexible plants. These are plants that are able to adjust operating states to account for seasonal product demand. And this is an important feature because very often the assumption made is that the plant and its various components simply run at maximum capacity 24/7. And in real life, of course, that doesn't happen because plant operations are subject to the market variations. A couple of years ago, I published a couple of papers that integrate fuzzy set theory with process graphs in order to account for what are known as soft constraints. In optimization, normally constraints are deterministic in the sense that if you set a limit of, say, 100, even a tiny violation of this constraint, if you go to 100.1, that is considered immediately an infeasible solution, and thus is eliminated from further consideration. Soft constraints allow for small degrees of user-specified violations of such limits and are important because by doing so you're able to come up with much more robust solutions. And we did this for design of polygeneration plants in 2017-2018. Earlier this year, we took the same fuzzy PGRAPH methodology and extended it not for the design problem, but for the operation problem. And we took the case of a polygeneration plant with a hydroelectric prime mover in a hypothetical off-grid remote community, and we considered how such a plant should be operated if there's a drought and the river flow rate is reduced, and in such cases, depending on the extent or severity of the drought, you may have to switch off parts of the plant and you would have to adjust the operating state of those which remain in operation, all the while trying to maintain the outputs that are required by this remote village by way of electricity, drinking water, and ice for refrigeration needs. Next, I'll talk about PGRAPH Future. Process graph has been used for a large range of network-type problems, ranging in scale from at the smallest at the molecular scale. Chemical reactions have been modeled using PGRAPH, and at the opposite extreme, on a grand scale, entire economic systems of entire countries have also been represented in PGRAPH form. And this slide shows some of the past and prospective work for which PGRAPH may be applied, which I discussed in a paper 2 years ago. Some of the work that I've done on non-engineering applications of PGRAPH include a 2015 paper in the Journal of Cleaner Production, where we used PGRAPH to represent the economy of an entire country, the Philippines in this case. The basis of this modeling approach is what is known in economics as the input-output model, which represents economic sectors as a process that produces a unique output while requiring specific inputs from other sectors. Input-output analysis also assembles such processes or sectors into an economic network, as shown at the bottom of the screen. And the economic network is a stylized representation of the real economy and allows for the analysis of, among other things, you could forecast the effects of natural disasters or changes in technology and so on. And we showed that by using PGraph in conjunction with input-output analysis, optimization can be done to minimize the adverse effects of disasters and loss of natural resources. In late 2019 until earlier this year, I worked with some colleagues on the use of PGraph to represent ecosystem networks, which are graphical representations of ecosystems where relationships among species can be mapped out, whether these are trophic relationships where one species eats the other, or these are, for example, mutualistic or competitive relationships. These can be mapped in PGraph form. And what we showed in this paper, which we expect to be published shortly, is that we can use PGraph to identify critical components of the ecosystem. And in the context of ecosystem management, that kind of information is useful because it can allow resources to be prioritized for the more important parts of the ecosystem. Another recent work which applies PGraph to a novel network is the use of PGraph for decision networks. In this work, which you may consider bordering on machine learning, we showed that PGraph can estimate or approximate the thought process of a human. So the input into the model is how a human expert ranks a small set of alternatives. And that is just ordinal information for 4 or 5 alternatives. And the human expert need not specify his or her thought processes in ranking these alternatives. We showed that we can use PGraph to approximate those thought processes via a decision model, which can then be used to generalize the expertise of the human who just provided quick inputs by way of ordinal information. Now I go to my conclusions. PGraph is important because, number one, network structure and discrete choices across network structure typically has a stronger influence on system performance as compared to variations of performance within a given network structure. Thus, the capability to enumerate these networks is very important in many problems. This enumeration capability is important for problem analysis by engineers and analysts, and also important for decision support, because typically the analysts would not be the final decision makers, but they would need to convince their superiors, for example, CEOs of corporations or politicians who make policies for entire cities or countries. The arguments can be made much more persuasive by showing that different alternatives have been explored to the fullest extent. In conclusion, PGraph is a powerful computational framework for solving PNS and PNS-like problems. And even though this framework was originally developed as a chemical engineering tool, it has been shown in recent work, including some of mine, that it is also useful for what are known as generalized process networks, both within and outside of engineering applications. I'd like to end by acknowledging some colleagues, and especially Professor Friedler, the father of PGraph himself. Professor Kathleen Aviso has been co-author of most of my PGraph work, and Professor Honglung Lam, who introduced me to PGraph close to a decade ago. So thanks to all three of you. And final quick plug, I'm involved in the management Of these 4 journals, we accept contributions where there are computational and sustainability aspects of engineering work. And in conclusion, I'll be happy to take questions now, or you may email me for queries after today's talk. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Raymond, for that excellent talk. You did, presented some new, analytical tools to deal especially with, green engineering problems. So thank you for that. Indeed, you have come a long way. You used to have hair before. I'm not party to that. So sorry. Anyway, we are going to take the questions later on when we finish, the next talk by another distinguished, speaker. So the second talk following Raymond's talk is on developing online science labs. So let me introduce our speaker. Romel Gomez is a professor and associate chair for undergraduate education of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of Maryland, College Park, Maryland, USA. He earned his PhD from the University of Maryland, MS from Wayne State University, and BS from the University of Philippines, all in physics. Dr. Gomez's research interests are in the broad areas of micromagnetism, biosensing, and nanotechnology. He has co-authored over 120 peer-reviewed publications, several book chapters, a book, and holds 3 US patents and 1 worldwide patent. Dr. Gomez also teaches engineering design, circuits, microelectronics, electromagnetics, quantum theory, and magnetic technology at the undergraduate and graduate levels. As the Associate Chair for Undergraduate Education, Dr. Gomez has helped strengthen the ECE curriculum in communications, embedded systems, cybersecurity, and power, which elevated the ECE ranking to 20th in the US, according to US News and World Reports. He is the architect of modern courses spanning freshman introductory to senior capstone design courses. He is also the lead proponent and founding director of the new Bachelor of Science in Embedded Systems and the Internet of Things under the University System of Maryland Higher Education. Dr. Gomez awards include the George Corcoran Award for Engineering Education, the National Science Foundation Career Award, the Clark School of Engineering Kent Faculty Teaching Award, the Keystone Professorship, the Clark School Faculty Service Award, the Poole and Kent Senior Faculty Teaching Award, the FieldDev Excellence Award in Science and Technology. It was also recognized the 2015 UP Alumni Association Distinguished Alumni Award in Science and Technology from the University of the Philippines, and in 2018, elected as a corresponding member of the National Academy of Science and Technology of the Philippines. Also, the PAASE 2008 Co-Lectureship Awardee in Engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Romel Gomez.
Thank you very much, Alvin. It's really great pleasure. And I hope this works because we're going to make this really highly interactive. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen. And I just wanted to know if you guys can actually see it. Could you just give me like a glance, like some indication that you can see that this is just basically 2 sites?
Yes.
Good?
Yes.
Can you see that? Okay.
Yes,
you.
Mel.
So this is kind of the point of this talk. These are live. You can play with it later on, but essentially this is what we're going to be talking about today. And so I know it's probably a lot. If you want, you can You can open the sites up now or save them later, but please keep in mind these two sites. Okay, so thank you very much, first of all, for this wonderful opportunity to give a talk. Thank you, Alvin, for a nice introduction. And it is really my pleasure to report to you what I believe is a work in progress, with the hopes that this project will alleviate the problem in offering laboratory courses damaged by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has created all sorts of difficulties for everybody. Most importantly, the university, right? So as educators, we understand the value of labs. In fact, failure to deliver labs can be existential threat to brick and mortar institutions. You would come to think of it. Why would you go to expensive traditional schools if everything were taught online anyway? Coursera, edX, other MOOCs are probably good enough. And it is also clear, absolutely clear, that the failure to provide hands-on experience is a death blow to the STEM field, particularly engineering. So we know this. And so like many other schools in the United States, we at College Park are struggling to find ways to deliver labs that are subject to social distancing guidelines. But I must confess, it has been very, very hard. Using these suggested, let's do a little math here. Using the suggested 6 feet of distance between students, we can estimate very clearly, pi r squared times 25 students, just 25 students in the lab. That will require more than 300 square meters of space. That is as big as a typical movie theater. Now, we don't have too many rooms like that at College Park, let alone labs. So what did we do? So what do people do? Well, there are a lot of band-aid solutions to the problem. Some put plastic barriers between stations, probably similar to the e-jeeps or the jeepneys that we have over there sometimes. Some even suggested to offer to extend university hours from early morning down to late at night, and even weekends. But it's going to cost money because those places have to be staffed that long. Then some courses convert labs, what they call labs, into simulations. Well, there's really nothing wrong with simulations per se, but simulation is as good as a thought experiment. The results are as good as what you have in mind, and it is really not real. So a lot of these solutions are probably okay, but it is clearly unacceptable in the long run. So what we need is a long-term sustainable solution that provide even more training to the students. And so faced with this, we embarked on a little ambitious program to develop labs that students can perform at home using only a laptop or a smart device. Now, this, I believe, is a paradigm shift and a clear departure from the norm. I suspect that something like this would probably be more ubiquitous in the near future, with COVID-19 or not. So this is the backdrop. This is the backdrop of what I'd like to tell you today. So the inspiration is coming from the so-called Industry 4.0 or the Fourth Industrial Revolution. In particular, it's also the topic of digital twins. So what is it? Well, in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, data from machines in factories are made readily available on the cloud, which can be accessed anywhere from any smart device. So in this scenario, all of the vital signs of the equipment, Dr. Tan's processing was a very complicated one. They could actually be monitored, no matter how complex a system. It could be monitored, reported, stored, analyzed digitally. And of course, once you have all of that, you can do all sorts of machine learning algorithms that you want. Nevertheless, one way of thinking about this is that the real factory, therefore, has a twin. It's a digital twin. Its physical operation is mimicked in the digital world with extraordinary fidelity. That's Industry 4.0. Now, why can't we do this? I mean, why don't we steal somebody else's good idea? So why can't we do something like this? And so we can bring experiments from students from their homes to the lab. So we can apply this concept, develop a system that that all they need, that the students, all the students need are laptops. Now, Industry 4.0 made huge investments in the digital twins technology, and we can leverage them in our application. They put a lot of money into it, mostly in the developers, the system developers, the hardware designers, and the systems integrators. They all were paid big bucks for this. Now, well, that's not our problem. After all, we are in a university and we are brimming with talent to accomplish this mission. And so I said, okay, well, let's do something like this now. So I assembled a team of students. There were people who, when I announced it, there's 35 students, many very good students, of which I had a hard time, but eventually I settled on 7. And I'd like to introduce them one at a time. Let's see if it works.
Hello, my name is Kang. I'm an undergrad electrical engineering major at the University of Maryland. And I've been put in charge of the hardware side of things, connecting everything. And I help with a little bit of code. And my specific interests are analog electronics.
Hi, I'm Michael Connolly. I'm a rising senior in computer engineering, and my area of expertise for this project is web development. So I've been working on both the user interface as well as the back end of the site, which involves authenticating users, creating a queue, and of course sending commands from our website to our device via the Microsoft Azure IoT Hub.
Hi, I'm Alex Mattingly. I'm a senior computer engineering major, and I'm working on programming the project's microcontroller to talk to the cloud and handle user instructions.
Hi, my name is Freddie, and I'm a rising junior major in computer engineering. For this project, I've been working on a few hardware components. I've been testing them for their accuracy and making sure that all of those hardware components which we'll be using are functioning properly. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Vineet Vajpayee, and I'm a rising sophomore and a computer engineering major. And as a part of the COVID-19 EC response team, I've been working on the communications aspect of the project and also the application of Azure's digital twins technology to future projects and labs.
Hi, my name is Pratulia Shandram. I'm a rising junior computer engineering major, and I was tasked with working on the live streaming solution for this project.
Hello everyone, my name is Ibrahim Khan, and I'm a rising junior computer engineering major, and I'm the front-end developer on this project. My responsibilities include making the UI, designing the user experience, and coding everything on the front end. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Now this is gonna. Okay. They're all gonna talk at the same. That's okay. But we'll get there. Okay. So here's the setup. I hope that you're still with me. So here's the setup. Oops, it went too far. Okay. So here's the setup. The idea is really quite straightforward. We wanted to do something quite simple, and yet it has some mechanical systems in it, some control systems. And so the goal is to simply move this object, this 3D object in two-dimensional space, in the x-axis and the y-axis, rather precisely using stepper motors with an encoder in them. And so the idea is for students remotely to be able to control this. And at the same time, we have ultrasonic distance sensors here that allows one to measure the x-axis distance and the y-axis distance. All of this stuff is streamed live in the video. So this is an example of this is actually the system. And I am going to then ask one of the students, this equipment actually resides in one of our students' basements. And so I'd like to ask Kang if he can share the screen. So I hope this works because, okay.
Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you, yes.
You can hear me? I don't have permission to share my screen.
How do you, okay, is there a way to, okay. There you go. We can see it. Okay.
Can you like pin my video then? You
Yes,
can see?
yes, it's there. Thank you.
Okay, you can see? Okay,
Yes.
so the system's pretty simple. Right now we just have these two here. That one's pointing in this direction. The one on the bottom is pointing in the bottom direction. And that's the distance sensors. And these switches here and there are the limit switches. So even if you have inputs that are too big, it'll just physically stop it. And then these are the limit switches for the other axis. And then these guys here are the stepper motors and the encoder combo that keeps track of our position. And then for bonus, we have this guy here. It's a portable oscilloscope. And since everything's been remote, we as I've been coding with Alex, that's how I've been kind of troubleshooting things together.
Thank you very much, Kang. So as you can see, we actually developed this project also remotely. So everything about this little exercise really was a test on how can we operate, how can we do things that are meaningful, even though we are physically distributed, and we've learned quite a bit. So that's the story. Now, let me just tell you, let me just now go on to the site that I said, please memorize. Some of you, if you open the site, actually, I don't know if there had been anybody who was able to see the sites at all. If I'm going to have maybe about 5, I don't see all of the people here, but if no one, I don't know if there's anyone who was able to access it, but please, you can enjoy this later on. So I'm going to have, I guess, one of the students of Petulia, one of the students is actually going to show you in real time what this, this thing is able to do. So the bottom line is the following. This website, let me go to the next page. Okay. That website, there are 2 websites. The one is a straightforward YouTube video, and you're just going to see something in real time. And when you execute something on the left side, that's the control panel. We call him Gizmo 1. If you do this, when you first log in, it'll say entered in the queue, it'll ask you for your credentials, it's going to get recorded. And once that's done, it's going to give you a very simple window that basically asks you to do X or Y. And then as soon as you hit submit, it will actually move this. And the cool thing about this is that you might be halfway across the world, the globe, and still be able to do this, and it's still got the 5-second delay. So if Petulia is available, Petulia, are you there?
Oh yes, I'm here.
Okay, so could you please give us a demonstration, a real-time demonstration of this?
Unfortunately, it looks like the host has disabled screen sharing. So
yeah, I don't know what else to do, but let's see. All participants. Okay. 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 Go ahead.
All right then.
It should be okay. All right. Good.
All right, so I've already entered in one command here. I set the X and Y coordinates both to 100.
Okay.
And if we look at the live stream video here, we can see that the apparatus has moved to those coordinates. And now for the sake of simplicity, we'll do -100, -100, and hit submit.
Very nice.
And let's say if we wanted to do something a little bit more complex.
Okay, while Petulia is filling in this blank here, you might notice down below submit, it says use JSON format. What it is that instead of typing these pairs of numbers individually, you can actually just define an array and actually have that array, submit that array, and it's going to execute that with a high degree of accuracy. The number right now, it is about 256 different steps. So if you wanted to draw, if you wanted to create your signature, if you wanted to do whatever it is that you wanted to do within 256 lines of commands, then it should work. So right now, Pratulya's got what, 368. Let's see what it does. Okay, that one, it goes down. It goes up, goes there. Okay, all right. Okay, all right. So for those of you who, you probably obviously see that, you saw that that's the letter M for I'm sorry, for Maryland. So we could do all sorts of things with this, and you can play. So I guess you can go and use the site. It's going to remain available for everybody. I think that you should try to do that with your children or grandchildren. So then I am going to now stop the participant share, and I am going to share my own. I'm going to go back. So so that's really the story. But now let's look at what's underneath the hood. That's very important. By the way, these are sample inputs. This is the M that Pratulya created. This one here, look at this. It's increment 100 4 times, which means that this thing is going to go to the right 4 times and go back to the left 4 times. But this is up, down, up, down, up, down. So you can imagine that this is going to generate a triangular wave backwards and forwards. Okay, so now what's the hood? I mean, the reason why I like to share this is that with the hopes that this could be emulated in our current setup. So now we have, I'm going to talk about the system level, hardware, the board, and cloud computing. So Alex is the main developer of the system level design. So I'd like to give him a few seconds to explain the system level design. Alex, are you there?
Yep. So users, in the same way as the demo that we had just shown, interact with the system in 2 points: the YouTube live stream and the web app, which is hosted using the Heroku service. The website is the main interface for the device, displaying data and allowing authenticated users to control it. Data from this site is then sent through the Azure IoT Hub, and on the other end is the ESP32 microcontroller, which can parse data from Azure to produce effects in its connected hardware. The sensor data is then sent back through the Azure Hub to be displayed on the site in regular intervals. And users can, of course, view all of this in action on the live stream.
Excellent. Excellent. So it is actually bidirectional. It is very important to understand that we have a bidirectional communication from the client to the device and back from the device to the client. And that's very important. So here are some of the hardware components. I don't want to belabor this point, but these are very inexpensive devices: stepper motors, rotary encoders, distance sensors, a bidirectional logic shifter just to make sure that the logic levels are the same from 3.2 to 5. And we have the ESP32 board. Altogether, it costs us less than maybe about $50 to $75 for all of these hardware components, which is actually very cheap. Let me mention something about the ESP32. Kang, you wanted to say a few words about ESP32? Okay, so Kang is currently not, but ESP32.
Oh yeah, I can. Sorry, I just had to unmute myself.
Okay.
So the ESP32, I'm sure you guys all know about the very easily usable Arduino. The ESP32 is actually cheaper and more powerful. It has 2 cores instead of the 1 core that Arduino has, and every I/O pin that you can use can be also used as a hardware interrupt, which makes it a lot more. You can make a lot more interesting things, and it just has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in.
Excellent, thank you. The one thing that I'm particularly impressed with this ESP32 is it's got a 12-bit A to D converter. Now, for those of you who are not geeks, it really means that you can actually measure voltages down to the level of very, very small levels on the order of several hundred microvolts, which is just slightly above noise level. It's also quite inexpensive. The thing costs about $15. I'm sure it's going to get much, much cheaper as more people use this. So again, moving on. So what about communications to the cloud? So Michael is the one responsible for this communication. So please, Michael, explain to us what's going on here.
Yeah, so Alex touched on this a bit, but basically the Azure IoT Hub controls all the functions on the device pretty easily. It can call any function that we upload to the device from the cloud. And the way users interface with that is through our website that's hosted on Heroku right now. And that's where the form is, that's where it keeps the queue and all the controls for the IoT Hub. And that also uses this database down here to authenticate and store users and sessions. And I'll talk more about the website on the next slide.
So I'd like to add that the reason why we are doing this, using the hub in the cloud, is because we designed it so it is massively deployable. The idea of controlling an instrument remotely is rather trivial. You can use something like a VPN, control somebody else's computer or your own. That's not so difficult, and the technology to do that is actually very, very simple. What this makes it more difficult is how are you going to have a massive deployment when you have, let's say, hundreds, if not thousands of people trying to access the site. You need to authenticate every single one of them for security reasons, and you need to store everything that they have put in there. So in other words, if you were a professor and you needed some assignments to do, they can create things on that they can do activities on the device, have it be recorded, and it'll be visible because it is stored. And this thing is massively deployable. It could do thousands at the same time. That's the value of having to go to the cloud. So the software part.
Yeah, so the website itself is written in full stack JavaScript, but really it can be written in any language you'd like. And the way it works is as soon as you log in, it authenticates with Google right now, and it stores the user and their session in the database so that we can keep a queue. So we only have one user controlling the device at a single time, and it uses WebSockets to update all the users about their place in the queue, and also it sends data from the ultrasonic sensor on the device so we can display a pretty graph on the front end.
Excellent. So this concept of front end and back end development is a buzzword in cloud computing. The MERN stack is one of several series of stacks that you could use, and this is particularly useful for this kind of application. Express JavaScript is, I think, developed by Facebook, and this is responsible for the front end. That's the one that the clients see on their computers. And Mongo Node is the back end. That's actually the devices on the device side, something along these lines. But that is an important part of the development, is the front end, or the so-called full stack development. Okay, so I think that we have touched upon the demonstration and also some of the things underneath the hood. I wanted to now move on to kind of a little bit broader perspective. It's been a while since I went to school in UP, and I don't remember many of the experiments now, but I still remember that there are quite a bit of experiments that you could do using this digital technology. Now, we can actually do things that are very, very sophisticated. Remember that we have 48 output pins that we can use, okay? The system that we have right now is 17. We use 17 pins, not even half of the pins were used. And so we can actually have far more sophisticated processes to be able to implement in labs in various fields. So in physics, we can go springs and pendulums, oscillations, optics, and interferometry, anything that you can control and actuate using electricity. That's really all you need. Now you have chemistry, biology, environmental sensing, earthquake, landslide sensing, control loops, and of course, in many other engineering fields, civil, aerospace, bio. Look, it just requires a little bit of imagination. And so this is what I wanted to impart to the audience right now. I'm hoping that we have shown you enough, and we have shown you how really uncomplicated it is to develop our own. This, I believe, is particularly suitable in the Philippine setting. Why? The hardware is inexpensive. The software licensing and cloud services are reasonably affordable. Right now, for us, it's free because students. But I think it'll cost around the order of about $25 a month to host something and use the Azure for for universities. So it's very cheap. But we do need a few things. We need to develop competency among our STEM and engineering majors. We really need to make them be aware that computer science is just not the computer thing that you have in your laptop or your mainframe. It has to include cloud computing, and the next generation of programmers are the ones who understand how to program in the cloud, full stack developers particularly. Now, how do we do that in engineering? Well, we have in the Philippines, we have 5-year engineering. The final year is what we call the thesis project. In the United States, we call them capstone. Well, professors, why can't we assign projects that are like this with a specific purpose of deploying it to lots and lots of high schools and lots of people in the Philippines? That would be awesome. I also think that our schools and universities should really collaborate amongst each other. LaSalle might have a set of labs that they are, famous for, and they could share those resources with students from other universities, UP, etc., right? And other places might have expertise, and so it's just a matter of really sharing resources. These things, as I said, are massively deployable, and they can handle lots and lots of loads. So it is something that we could use in a very collaborative fashion in the Philippines. Now, with anything else, despite the fact that this is inexpensive, we need money to do it. I think we already have the talent and the skill in the Philippines, but we do need the money to develop it. And I hope that there are members in the audience who are in the leadership position to support projects like this, because I think this is essential towards the advancement of the Philippines. We should not be left behind too much. A lot of countries already are doing this intensively, Australia, China, Korea, Taiwan, and we should get in the action as well. So let me conclude, my time is up. I believe that we have a real opportunity to make an impact on science and engineering education and research. This reminds me way back when we started VISER in the Philippines. This is the Versatile Instrumentation Research for Science, Education, and Research. Versatile system. And it's right now, it's doing very well, my understanding, at NIP under the guidance of Dean Tapa. Anyway, I think that we can leverage the power of the Internet of Things really to create a change, a paradigm shift in offering modern experiential training delivery, new labs. So COVID had brought us disaster. It looks like COVID, to me anyway, it looks like, I was placed in the side of the building with COVID. The side of the mountain, right? I didn't know what to go. But here's my thought. We should not really worry about falling off the cliff, okay? Instead, we should focus on how to get to the top. This is a paradigm shift. This is something that we could do, and we have reason to do it. And therefore, I believe we should do it. Okay, having said that, I think my time is up, and I am simply going to quit now and wave a goodbye. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much, Mel, for the excellent, I should have proposed to Giselle, this session should have been for 5 hours, I just couldn't stop Mel, speaking. And Of course, Raymond, had you been, on a non-pre-recorded lecture, I could have also stopped you from speaking. Excellent talks. To follow Dr. Joost lecture, earlier. Now we are open for the question and answer. So, can I have the question from the floor? Okay. Let me read to you the question for Raymond Tan from Hill Mendoza. It seems to me that the P-graph network can be optimized using the branch and bound algorithm. I think you may have done this. Can you give us a sense of the size of the network optimized by accelerated branch and bound? MSG to me looks like it too can be optimized beyond identifying superstructure using combinatorial algorithms or rules. If you have done this, can you give us a sense of the amount of complexity of the combinatorial rules used? If the fuzzy MILP is an appropriate algorithm to use. On the use of AI, have you considered using random forest or boosted decision trees? Raymond?
Right. Thank you, Hill, for your, I think I can read 4 or 5 questions in there, and I'll try to make this really quick and economical. First, regarding optimization, the standard PNS problem is a special class of MILP problems. Those, as you know, are solved using a standard branch and bound. And P-graph is based on because PNS problems are a special class of MILPs with additional information. That additional information can be used to accelerate the branch and bound optimization and reach solutions faster because of properties of the PNS problem, which I can't go into that in very much detail. Your second question, which I'll try to take up in conjunction with a later question that I can see on screen regarding cursive dimensionality. I just speak of a recent example by the powerhouse research team at Carnegie Mellon University. Just by way of background, this PSE team in CMU traditionally has subscribed to a different school of thought from P-graph. So they would be the last people we would expect to use P-graph. There was a paper from their group published in 2018 where they were trying to look at chemical reaction networks. And what happened was they could see the net observable reaction, and they were trying to deduce the individual reaction steps and what are the possible true reactions taking place on a stepwise basis. And initially they were looking at 30 billion, that's 10 raised to 9, 30 billion alternative reactions in their project. And I can imagine this would have been very stressful for the PhD student who is doing the analysis. But eventually they used P-graph and scaled it down and pruned scaled down the search, and they found 70 or so potential chemical reactions and eliminating billions of others from further consideration. So that's a practical example of how you can really scale down problem size. And I think it speaks to Joost's question as well. Now, I'm interested in your last question because you speak of AI, and it was in October of 2019 that I started to speculate. I remember I was having dinner with a friend in Rome, and I asked, you think we can use P-graph for artificial intelligence applications? And it took about 8 months of gestation. I'm happy to note now, even though I'm going out on a limb, I'm working with 2 colleagues from LaSalle, Angeline Lau, who's a mathematician, and Kathleen Aviso, who's had extensive work in P-graph. And we're going to use P-graph for AI applications. And the closest analog that we can find is something called fuzzy combination.
Oh, gone.
Mel, you can retire early. There's so much job to be done in the Philippines. You can do it remotely, you know. Very much, important for our, elementary, high school, and even at the tertiary
I
levels.
think a lot.
You know.
I think a lot.
Your visor, you have to extend it, really, to be honest. So, anyway, any question on the floor for Mel while we reconnect to Raymond later on? Okay, from Giselle Concepcion. Mel, can you tell us a bit about how to interface visor with this online lab education?
In a way, yes. It's really just about technology. See, what we're doing with Visor is we've got these instruments that we adopted for science education, right? And so we're using the core, a microprocessor that essentially has this input outputs that control things and measure things. The difference now is this is actually a minor step, which is now to develop devices that not only measure things locally, but they can actually talk to the cloud. What does that mean? You should have devices that have communication systems, such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, LoRaWAN, these things. So the good thing about this is when we started Visor, chips with built-in communication systems were not available. Now the technology has advanced significantly that you can get. Look at this, it's $15 at today's prices for something that is twice or three times as powerful as the old stuff. So we can still actually do this. So all of the products that we have at Visor, it's just converting them as it is, converting them into something that we could use in the cloud. So then students in the provinces do not need to go and buy this equipment, right? They simply have to go to the high school or the central high school or the barangay halls or something like that they have this thing. And so they just maybe play with them using their cell phones or whatever, or laptops. So in some sense, the Visor can actually, this is what I would like to call it, Visor 2. So this is the next generation of distributed science experiments.
Okay, thank you, Mel, for that. Okay, let me read just some comments here from. I think Raimundo Asuncion has one. Let me just read it. Where is it? I'm losing it. Oh, Raymond is back. Raymond, sorry. Let me...
Gawawan mo na tita. Ninihan mo kasi yung loob.
Yan ka muna. Tumayo.
Oo nga. Lahat na.
Can someone put off? Sorry.
So I guess. Can you hear me? I have the chat.
Yes, Mel. Yes, Mel.
Sorry. So you mentioned Sean. No? Hello, Sean. So I'm going to read. Thanks for sharing. What are you espousing on collaborate? Yes. Is exactly what we're doing in the field of microbiology. We have established a consortium, different universities collaborating to come up with online common laboratory. Well, I don't know much about microbiology, Sean, but I believe that if you've got systems over there that you can actually measure using voltages, voltmeters, or you can have processes that you can actuate remotely. In other words, if you've got processes that you can replace your hands with machines, then that's it. You could do these experiments without any problem at all. Now, in microbiology, I think you would probably have, I think this is actually very interesting because you might have to develop something like this in the field of robotics, where you now have systems, these remote systems that are actually capable of manipulating things, not only stepper motors, but things like bottles and things that will shake and you can change all of that. That is a very sophisticated system, but it is something that I think can be done using this process. But the bottom line is, if you have, I think it's a case-to-case basis. Look at all the experiments that you have and you ask yourself, pwede pa tong gawin can it be done remotely? Do I have to have a physical presence in there? Kung hindi, that's okay. Then you can do it. So I remember the story of Luli Cruz, and when they were talking about how they were measuring the effect of the conotoxin on the mice. As I remember, they were saying that they would invert the cage and they would count the number of mice dropping down, and they get the statistics and they got what they need. Well, something like this could actually do this. In fact, this is a rhetorical question in one of my discussions with my team. So what it is you have a cage with mice. So natutulog sila. Kung hindi sila natutulog, they're floating around. So you just have a device that will turn this cage around. So the mice that are conscious will probably go and climb up, and the ones that are not conscious are probably going to stay in the bottom. And that's something so easy to do with, I don't know, with either computer vision or something. Remember, you have a means to look at it. You have the video, you have the YouTube video, and with YouTube video is the data, and you can do image processing to figure out who's sleeping and who's not. But the whole point of turning the cage, well, that's something you could do remotely. So you can do all sorts of things like this. So another example is I wanted to know, how much the mungo grows every day. I don't need to be there all the time. I just have a video to take a look at it, maybe time-lapse photography. And then I will put in a system where I'm going to put a little bit of whatever moisture, water, when I see that the moisture is low. All of these things are actually done already. The one thing that we are proposing here is that we do it in a massive scale. That's all. So that's the kind of nebulous idea that I'm trying to propose here.
Okay, thank you, Mel. I know it's worth an extension for an hour. You see, rarely we can have these excellent speakers together. So this is now beyond the script. We wanted to end at exactly 10 o'clock as what we have planned, but I'm happy, and PAASE is happy to extend with our distinguished speakers. Let me just have one more question for you, Mel, before we go back to Raymond. From Rizalinda De Leon. Thank you, Mel, for the great presentation, which I found very informative, especially since UPD Chemical Engineering Department will be developing remote-controlled chemical engineering lab experiments in collaboration with the Electrical and Electrochemical Engineering Institute. While such setups would be accessible for those who have good internet and devices, what would you suggest for students who are beyond internet reach?
That's the $64,000 question. Look, we can only give it to you in retail. Kasi this technology really relies on internet connectivity. So we can offer this as long as you have internet connectivity. It's like oxygen. It's very hard to implement anything for people that may not have oxygen in them. I'm sorry to have such a drastic analogy, but it is what it is, that we need them in order for them to access. We need the backbone, we need internet, the Wi-Fi. On the other hand, let me turn the table a little bit. You can actually do experiments that you do not need, let's say out in the field. You can do experiments out in the field without internet connectivity. How? Well, there are these other channels of long-range communication. It's like the frequencies, different frequencies. No, I'm not suggesting that we grab the frequencies of ABS-CBN. No, that's not my suggestion. All I'm saying is there are these frequencies available so that people actually can use devices that can communicate. They're low bandwidth, but they're pretty good in communicating data. Let's say out in the field, in the forest, and down to a central location about 5 kilometers away, you can do all of that. Without any internet. We can also use the GSM or the LTE or the 5G system. Ultimately, I'm sure it's going to happen. Not yet in the foreseeable future, but as soon as we get the infrastructure of the phone, if we can have a phone, we can actually do all of this stuff. In fact, the phone system, if we have the good bandwidth brought about by the next generation, we don't need the Wi-Fi at all, so we can access everyone. But for now, Dean, it is what it is. Kailangan, we really need internet connectivity sa ngayon.
Okay, thank you, Mel. On that note, let us move to Raymond again. He's back. Richmond, can we show questions for Raymond, please? Okay, let me read the one coming from Mike Romentilia. I think this has not been read, correct? Anyway, thanks for this informative presentation. My interest to apply such tool in multi-hazard risk management. Can you imagine a future PGRAPH application in this problem domain? If yes, what could be the potential limitations of this method to the robustness in such application? Raymond?
Okay, thanks for that question, Mike. I think before I got cut off, I was describing that I'm developing the theoretical aspect of the work on a special class of cognitive maps with 2 colleagues from LaSalle. What I've been thinking about also is applying that to a current problem, which is COVID-19. And very quickly, let me describe the problem. The problem with human expertise is it comes in pockets. So you would have, for example, people who specialize in viruses or epidemiology being concerned and being knowledgeable about a specific aspect of the problem. And on the other hand, you would have economists and sociologists understanding different aspects of the problem. And there is, of course, a human tendency to look at a complex and wicked problem from the lens that you're comfortable with. And thus, economists would fail perhaps to understand the full hazards of a disease like this, and conversely, people who work with diseases may not grasp the full economic implications. I see PGRAPH essentially as a network assembly algorithm. It's a bit like having pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, which you can then assemble automatically with an algorithm. And this is what we're looking to do, that those pockets of knowledge and sub-networks of understanding how things work within certain disciplines can be assembled into a larger network, so you get a better grasp of what the problem looks like from the grand scale and from different disciplinal perspectives, and perhaps you'll be able to come up with better solutions to things like balancing loss of life with this pandemic. Thank you for that.
Okay, Raymond. Let's have another question from Joost Santos. What are the similarities and perhaps strengths of a PGRAPH over stock and flow model used in system dynamics modeling? Also, how does a PGRAPH handle the so-called curse of dimensionality? I could imagine complex systems would be large scale and highly interdependent. Raymond? Raymond, you're still there? Okay. Anyway, we can pass on that question to him, and he can actually share is answered. So we are very much indeed happy to have been graced by so many personalities in this particular session. Our academics, researchers from the industry, government. This has generated a lot of interest, perhaps because this is a plenary session about technology. But in the meantime, I'm seeing Raymond back here. Raymond, can you just answer a question from Joost Santos, please? Thank you. Did you get the question, or Richmond? Can I have again the question from Joost? Raymond is there. What are the similarities and perhaps strengths of P-graph over stock and flow model used in system dynamic modeling? Also, how does P-graph handle the so-called curse of dimensionality? I could imagine complex systems with a large scale and highly interdependent. Raymond. Okay, we lost Raymond again. Joost, I thought we're done with your disaster. I was about to end that the saying we have actually got away with disaster. But it seems like your question seems to not do not get the response from Raymond. Never mind. I think in the interest of time, can we have received a number of messages for our two speakers, several commendations coming from our participants for Raymond and Mel. Excellent demo, fantastic, Mel, amazing. This app can be used in interactive virtual teaching or learning. Some fun, great app. Great ideas. I know it's there's just a host of great talk, Mel. Very engineering talks indeed. I learned a lot of new knowledge from this webinar. Excellent talks. Thank you. Thanks for all speakers for a great session. Great talks. Thanks. Thank you, Raymond, Mel. Thanks everyone. Nice to see familiar names in the attendees. Okay. So under Alato, we will send that to you. So indeed, this has been an amazing morning for everyone. Excellent talks from our co-lectureship awardees from the 2020 to the 2017 and the 2008. Put them together. A 2-hour time would not be indeed enough. So let me just give some reminders on behalf of our board chair of PAASE, Carlito Librilla. With all the happenings, including the excellent lectures at the 40th APAMS, it's time to remind you, our members of PAASE and those prospective members, to have your membership dues in. PAASE, welcomes donations, and we rely on the membership fees. They will be used to fund exciting APAMS meetings and the general operation of the academy. You can check our website at www.paase.org. Membership fees for lifetime membership, that's 4,000 pesos. Otherwise, that's a yearly 1,000 for members. Outside members, coming out of outside the Philippines, that's a lifetime membership of $400 with a yearly dues. If you are not paying the lifetime fee, that would be $50 per year. So I would like to encourage our colleagues, members of the PAASE, and those prospective members to support, financially, and we welcome donations so that we can actually be able to sustain our voluntary efforts, in bringing science to the masses, to the people. And of course, this is a science for change. And we are fortunate to have members of the PAASE from the US and all over the world connecting with the Filipino scientists here and bring, science closer to the people and to everyone. So this has been really a great day. I would like to thank again our distinguished speakers. Maybe you can show your videos, Joost, Raymond and Mel. Of course, this is your plenary session 2 of the 40th PAASE anniversary celebration. This is your 20th APAMS. Giselle is there, who is our PAASE president and the host of our members in the US who are actually staying late now. I know in the Eastern it's time, it's over 10 o'clock in the evening, and I know this is worth the wait. Would like to thank Carlito and everyone, for sharing your time. Giselle, our PAASE president, and behind all this, we would like to acknowledge, the services of Mr. Richmond Pancho, who has been, staying very late and early morning, has to wake up, to make sure that all the technical details and the logistical requirements for this APAMS that will run until August 14 will run smoothly. So we cannot say any more, other than thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joost. Thank you, Raymond. Thank you, Mel, and all our participants who have stayed late, in the morning and late in the evening for this wonderful opportunity. So we will continue to engage ourselves, not only during this APAMS event, but in our daily, activities as we are faced with the challenges of this COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, Mel, you have done a lot of ideas on how we can, address this connectivity and delivering education, especially under these circumstances. And to our industry participants, you've benefited a lot from Raymond's talk on the use of PGRaph and process, and of course, for our Philippines, always faced with disasters and with this pandemic, we have Joost Santos given an excellent idea on how novel, models can be used, to help our decision makers and our researchers. So again, thank you so much. This is Alvin Culaba, your host for today. And now we would like to end the session. Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow for another exciting 3 parallel sessions. And maybe, Mon, you can just quickly show it. We have another session tomorrow as we continue APAMS 2020 with 3 parallel, exciting sessions to be chaired by several distinguished also scientists from the Philippines and all over the world. So no, it starts at 8 o'clock, runs through maybe 10 to 11 in the morning. Keep up in your schedule, and another engaging morning and evening from the US tomorrow. That's all for today. Thank you, and good morning and good night to the US. Thank you, and adieu. Thanks, everyone. Group, okay. We have taken